Divorce lawyers of Reddit. What's the most screwed you've seen someone? I used to be a divorce lawyer, but it was not something I was proud of, plus the partner I worked for was such an asshole. I was the 11th associate that worked for her in 10 years. We used to go through 2 to 3 secretaries a year. Couple screwed up cases. I remember our client and his wife were Mormon. During the divorce she used to tell him that he had to give her what she wanted in the divorce because they were sealed in the church and would be spending eternity together. We had to fight him not to give her more than she deserved. Represented the wife of a minor celebrity and said celebrity would file for divorce regularly when she acted up. Once he determined she was behaving as he liked, has cancelled the divorce. Rotten bastard. My mother divorced my dad when I was like 2 years old. They had bought a house together and my dad's family offered her fair value to buy the house from her. She denied the offer and puts it up for sale publicly. My dad's family buys it for 40% less than what they offered my mom in a public bidding auction. Husband and wife are getting divorced after multiple attempts to reconcile. Husband is an attorney, though not family law. One of the attempted reconciliations includes wife losing some weight and sending husband some sexy/naked pictures. Once divorce litigation started, husband sent these pictures to wife's minister father asking if he knew what a horse he raised. During litigation, husband also drove around at night with their 2 small children in the car to find wife's car at a friend's house and pour airplane acid. Yeah, apparently it's a thing all over wife's hood. I've worked as a legal assistant for 2 family law attorneys for the last 8 years. One of the cases that made me the angriest was a man who cheated on his wife when she had cancer. He then leaves his wife and attempts to hide all his assets while she's undergoing chemotherapy. Fortunately, my boss is a badass. She teamed up with a forensic accountant and they took him to the cleaners. He even had to pay the forensic accountant's bill and attorney's fees. I met a girl in college who was not incredibly bright and was suddenly in a blind panic to make money. The reason was she had been kicked out of the place she was staying and needed emergency money. She had been kicked out because she was living with her boyfriend in his house while his wife was in the hospital due to brain cancer. So when she came home, still very much not likely to live long, he booted this 19-year-old out of his house with a "you can move back in when she dies." His wife beat cancer, came home, was receiving mail for a strange name and eventually tracked her down on Facebook. From there she found out that her 47-year-old husband had been dating a 19-year-old for just over a year, officially likely actually longer, and put him through the ringer. One of my father's friends tried to salt the earth before getting divorced. A rental house and a cabin were deeded to relatives. The cars they drove every day were sold to other relatives for tiny sums. Stocks handed over to a trust for the children, etc. He even vanished a chunk of cash from the company he co-owned with his wife using funny invoices and stopped paying himself a salary, electing to burn through their personal savings for over a year instead. He learned that judges really hate when you try to hide or intentionally diminish assets, and they will absolutely refer you to prosecutors for fraud. I don't think he did any jail time in the end, but his ex-wife got everything, plus the satisfaction of firing him from his own company. Not a lawyer, but I knew a guy who lost his own cell phone number. He had the same number since high school, but she convinced the judge that she used his phone enough to get his number. Basically he kept his clothes and car and had to pay alimony. I'm not a divorce lawyer, but we once went to our open court with uni, and it was a divorce case. Our whole class was there watching them get divorced. It was a Dutch business guy and his Eastern European wife. She was talking about how he forced her to do anal and BDSM against her will and shoot. Their children were also there watching, and I remember feeling so bad for the kids. They were like 12/15, and not only did they have to watch their parents divorce, they had to hear about their father's fetishes that he forced on their mother, while an entire class of uni students was watching along gasping like we were watching a freaking movie. The lady was crying while she was talking about all his fetishes that she absolutely hated. Judge asked if he ever was violent, and she said he slapped me on my face and ass, but only during sex, but I didn't want it. I remember seeing their 15-year-old daughter, completely red face and eyes filled with tears, that she tried to hold in. Looked like she wanted to bury her head into the sand. Felt so terrible for that girl. Meanwhile the girl next to me kept pushing her leg against mine every time this lady spoke a word like OMG did you hear that shit. Friend of mine is a divorce lawyer. His favorite is the time the husband in a bitter divorce got some slimy lawyer and said he would outlawyer her and break the bank before giving her anything she wanted. This was in front of my friend, a lawyer. He looks at her and says I'm working for you pro bono free from this moment forward. He looks back at them and says I got all day. My favorite divorce story of all time, my buddy meets girl, gets married, la dee da. 6 months later, she runs off with another dude. After a couple months my buddy filed for divorce. He told her listen, we've been married 6 months. Let's do an uncontested divorce since you haven't worked or anything and I own everything and did before I met you. She puts up a fight and eventually comes to I had a car coming into this marriage and I'm leaving with one. She sold her car for some dumb shoot. He offers her the truck. 10 years old with 150k miles, but meticulously maintained. She said nope, so off to court they go. She got zip, nada, empty-handed. My favorite justice boner of all time. My father-in-law had a stroke at the age of 46. He lost the use of his right arm and the ability to speak. Shortly after his stroke his wife decided they needed to move into a smaller house and sell their current one which was under his name and he had paid for. This also meant she was kicking out my brother-in-law and my wife's girlfriend at the time. She also decided to put down my wife's cat and get rid of the family dog since their new house wouldn't have pets according to her. She sold their house at a loss and immediately bought a new car with the money. My wife and her brother found a new place and my father-in-law and his wife moved in with one of her kids. After 6 months she dumped him at my wife's place and said I can't take care of him. We are getting a divorce. I don't know how it happened exactly, but she got half his money and a new car. She then went to all his family and lied to them and somehow convinced them that he was being abusive and didn't love her anymore. We tried to convince him to fight it, but he refused to do anything because he was so depressed. The lawyer ruled he was of sound mind, so he could make his own decisions. My wife is still upset about it and wishes he had tried to fight it, but he still loved his wife, so he didn't want to. He lives with us now, and it's doing a lot better emotionally. TLDR. Father-in-law had a stroke, lost his home, his wife, half his savings, and his family. On my year abroad in the US I took a domestic relations class ran by an ex-judge, who told us a few good ones. The first one was a couple who gathered their entire stuffed toy collection and split them in court, each taking turns to pick. He said they weren't even collectibles, a lot of cheap ones you'd get at the fair. My favorite is where both parties were both being unreasonable and not thinking of the kids. In the end he awarded the house to the kids, who would permanently live there, and the parents who had joint custody would take it in turns to live there. His argument was that the kids' lives should take priority. Best thing was neither party could afford to buy an additional place on their own, so the couple had to rent a small flat together and also share that. Pretty badass judge in my opinion. Client's husband was an elected official, may still be, and signed a separation agreement. He fails to do anything he agreed to, so the wife sues, and he fights saying that she forced him to sign. She shows emails where he negotiated the agreement and agreed on the final draft, and she showed emails where she tried to work with him on payments he owed her. He loses after making his staff member come into court who testifies that he didn't think he was being forced to, and having a meltdown in court. Rumor was he threw his elected title around the judges away to get them to help him. A few months later he shows up to contest the actual divorce, citing the same stuff, and then says that she threatened to shoot him. Judge sides with the client. He has to now pay her like $6,000 or get thrown in jail. All cold been avoided if he responded to the emails she sent him. Wow, the amount of money at the end makes the whole story very anticlimactic. My parents got divorced when I was 12. I'm sketchy on the details, but I remember it was long, drawn out and acrimonious. Eventually, my mum was awarded a massive settlement. My dad was basically left with superannuation and nothing else. After the ruling was handed down, my mother's own lawyer walked into my father and his lawyer's meeting and said that ruling was bullshit, you should appeal. Gotta be pretty bad when a lawyer wants his own win overturned. Edit. He didn't appeal. He was a bit broken by that point and just wanted to move on. Sorry for lack of detail. I was 12, it was some time ago. My dad told me the story years later. I can answer for a friend. His wife was divorcing him because he's an unreliable idiot. He figured that he was smarter than everyone, so he dragged out the process as long as he possibly could, making it as difficult as possible on her, scheduling and rescheduling meetings, not showing up, promising to do a thing, and then backtracking later, refusing to negotiate at all. I think his plan was to make the divorce so difficult on her that she would just stay married. He was also doing all this pro se, so her lawyer had to deal directly with him. After a year of this, his wife had had enough. She told her lawyer to make it happen, so the lawyer set a date and the court served him notice of the divorce proceeding. She showed up to court, and he wasn't there, so as the only party there, she got a very one-sided deal. She got their business, custody of the kids, the house and all contents, her car, and the bank account. He got his car, his clothes, and half the proceeds of the sale of the house when she decides to sell it. That's it. He found out about this when he called the court a week after it happened. What had happened is her lawyer served the divorce notice to an address in a different town with a similar name. Normally this would have been caught by his attorney, who would have received notice directly from the court, but since he had no attorney, there was no one other than him that the court could send it to. He finally hired a lawyer and tried to get the settlement tossed, as he claimed he was never served, but the judge said there was nothing he could do. Edit. I have relayed this as best I can, and as it was told to me. Most of the details come from my friend, the protagonist in this narrative, so YMMV. I did look up the public court records, and they appear to corroborate the events in as much as can be determined. Not an attorney, but work in family law. My favorite is the man who accidentally texted his family group chat with a message meant for his mistress. More of an estate issue, but deceased man was married 9 years ago to a woman. These are what I call late in life marriages, where a woman with nothing marries a retired man with a house, retirement income, and time to vacation. Man brings a fully paid for house into the marriage. He takes out a mortgage to presumably afford vacations and new wife expenses. Bank requires both names on the mortgage, so he deeds it to them as joint tenants. 2 years later, she leaves him for another man and was never heard from again. A couple months ago, he finds out he's going to die. He immediately files for a divorce, but it was never finalized. He created a deed to his children not valid because it would need her signature, and a will which describes in detail how terrible she was, and disinheriting here completely doesn't matter because state allows a wife to avoid the will and take 1/2 of marital property. He died before anything could be done. She now owns the only remaining assets of the house and a marital car. Even though the son moved into the house and took care of his dying father for 2 years, no heirs will receive anything. She will receive a hefty house and 20k car. Not a lawyer, but a dramatic divorce story. I know a man who was falsely accused of domestic violence during the separation from his wife. She lived in the marital home, and he paid for everything for her despite her having a full-time job. She got a boyfriend who didn't work and allowed him to live in the house. My friend went to meet her at the house for a final time to decide who would take what from the house. He was recording everything on his phone without her knowledge, as he was afraid something would be said or happen that might be held against him. They couldn't agree. He left and found out she had Kalednin reported that he had made death threats and assaulted her. The divorce went downhill from there. He spent 14k on lawyers to finally have the charges dismissed. During his criminal ordeal, she sued him for 250k in alimony. The recording saved him with the police, and to this day she insists he assaulted her. An unbelievable shoot show. Not a divorce lawyer, but my sister and her family was a second-hand victim of one place they were renting. Was owned by a couple who were going through a less than amicable divorce, went to court 3 times over the settlement, and by the 4th time the judge ordered that all their assets they acquired over their marriage, 2 houses and 3 cars, were all to be liquidated and be split 50 over 50. During my dad's recent divorce of my stepmom, he voluntarily gave her the house, 2 of 3 cars, and most of the assets. He only wished to take his mechanic's tools, personal items, and some necessities like clothes, towels, some dishes, some cooking utensils, etc. My stepmother demanded in court that he reimburse her monetarily for all of these items, to include the 6 towels he had taken with him, which she had apparently valued at $1,000. When the judge heard this after being informed that my dad had basically voluntarily given her about 85% of his net worth, he had to hide a laugh when he said that no, he would not be requiring my dad to pay $1,000 for 6 Walmart brand bath towels. Not a lawyer, but saw the whole scene unfold. Dad had a neighbor who divorced her absolute D-bag husband. Cheating, name calling, everything was on the table for this guy. Together they had 2 little boys, and she was super mom. Seriously, she loved those kids more than life itself. The husband made all the money though, and when he realized she had no assets to take, he went for the only thing she had left, the children. He took her to court over and over and over until she couldn't afford the legal fees anymore, then argued that she couldn't afford to care for the children. He took her kids out of spite, bought them everything they ever could want after the divorce, and generally let them do whatever they wanted. When the boys found out they were living with their dad, they cheered. That sweet woman was left with absolutely nothing, all because she dared divorce the shooty husband that didn't pay attention to her in the first place. Not a divorce lawyer, but there's this security guard that works at the mall my friend works at, and he immigrated to the US from India and was in an arranged marriage with his American-born Indian girl. He busted his ass off to put her through college and dentistry school, and she ended up cheating on him with her ex-boyfriend from high school and ran off with him. They didn't get divorced, but has still paying off her school loans. I know a guy who got a prominent position in our community and ended up cheating on his wife and deciding to leave her. He's insanely popular until what he's done to his wife is exposed. She files for divorce, and he decides to give her everything, I assume hoping to get everything over quickly and have people move on. Not so, ends up losing his position the next cycle and has nothing at all but his car. He had given his wife millions of dollars in real estate, equipment, town, the construction co, massive savings accounts, stocks, bonds, etc., just to try to save face. After losing his position, he tried to appeal his divorce. Not a divorce lawyer, but my old boss got thrown in jail for missing divorce court. I live in a small town that has court every second and fourth Thursdays. If there is no court and you are detained, you get hauled 4 hours to the closest city. Guy got arrested while having lunch with his 6-year-old son and taken to the remand center for a night. When he finally saw the judge said to his ex-wife, "Please don't waste my time on something like this again." Then she drove him 4 hours home while he weaned her out. Lawyer here. I had a client who was the cleanest cut of the clean. Think of the nicest, most innocent, stable guy you can think of. I only take clients based off their initial few weeks of behavior and background check. He was basically Gotham Mr. Rogers. No criminal record, same company for 20 years, great character references that were prof. Then the client went and got not 1, but 2 DUIs and an assault charge. Then he committed suicide. I know he didn't want me to get stuck with no money and hordes of paperwork. I think him a nicer guy, but sometimes I wonder. I once agreed to represent a person in a divorce. They ended up not being happy with me, so they fired me. NBD, I returned the unearned portion of the retainer, boxed up their file, and sent it. But before I had been fired, I had placed the case on a jury docket. I told them, "You still have a jury trial." Jury trial came, and they didn't show up. Lost everything. My dad got shafted on every divorce. First one was alimony and child support for 22 years. Second one was child support for my brother and I. Both of us were for 22 years. Third one got half of everything: home, vacation homes, savings, cars, art, the whole 9, and alimony for a year. The fourth one, he is just buying another home with her now, so we will see how this one goes.